Hi everybody. How can we trust our brains? We use our brains when we think. So if we are going to trust our thinking, we need to trust our brains. So how do we know that we can trust the brain? This is a very interesting question, and I was asked this question today. I was asked it under a very specific premise, but never mind that premise yet. I'm going to return to that later in the video. Let's let's not jump into conclusions. Instead, let's just start at a very basic. If we are going to trust that our brain works properly, we need to trust that the brain exists. So, how can we trust that our brains exist? This is something that we can never truly prove. Of course, there's a lot of evidence that the brains exist, but all this evidence comes from data processed by the brain. If the brain isn't real, then the evidence for the existence of the brain isn't real either. So this is one of the few things we simply have to believe. But let's make these beliefs as simple and basic as possible. In my 5x3 compass for reality, I suggest 3 beliefs about reality. We should believe that reality exists, reality is not a conspiracy, and reality does not revolve around any specific person or group. You can also use the word universe instead of reality. The universe exists, the universe is not a conspiracy, and the universe does not revolve around any specific person or group. If we embrace these simple beliefs, then we have a basis for believing that the brain exists, and we also have a basis for trusting the brain. So, should we embrace these basic beliefs? Yes, I think we should. First of all, there's really nothing speaking in favor of these things being wrong. What we do sort out by embracing these beliefs is a lot of competing beliefs that are completely pointless, that can never be proven or disproven, and doesn't lead us anywhere at all. For example, let's say that the universe was actually created last Thursday. We were created complete with memories and everything else. If we have a hole in our pockets, these holes were created along with our clothes, and our tattoos, if we have any, were created along with our bodies, and so on. So we can never disprove that theory. It's just a bullshit, nonsense, pointless theory. But if we don't embrace these 3 basic beliefs, that the universe exists, the universe is not a conspiracy, and the universe does not revolve around any specific person or group, then we can go around arguing whether the universe was created last Thursday or was it maybe Tuesday, and then people can argue with each other based on how they feel. Well, I feel that the people in the Tuesday camp are nicer than the people in the Thursday camp, so I think universe was created last Tuesday. It doesn't get us anywhere. For all intents and purposes, the universe does exist, and we live in this world whether we want to or not. We can't just wish the universe away and change it into something else. So let's just roll with it and assume that these basic three principles, all right? And by the way, this is regardless of whether you're religious or atheist or whatever, unless you have a very particular faith based on the idea that we are all being dreamt by a god, so reality doesn't exist, it's just a dream, or something like that. Unless you have that kind of spiritual belief, it's completely pointless to deny these three basic points. So, okay, we have established that the brain exists. Now the next question is, can we trust the brain? Well, evidence have it that no, we can't trust every brain every time. Except there's actually so that there are some brains that we can almost never trust, and there's no such thing as a brain that we can always trust. But this is where the third part comes in. The universe does not revolve around any specific person or group. In other words, we can keep each other in check. We can keep gathering evidence and judge it against each other. And of course, there will be systematic errors sometimes. But assuming that the universe is not a conspiracy or something like that, assuming that there isn't a very huge conspiracy that keeps changing the evidence to fit their agenda, we will step by step sort it out and get information that we can trust. So while we can't trust our brains 100%, we can trust them enough. We can have enough faith in our brains to move forward. Now, we have established that there are errors in our brains, that people sometimes hallucinate or sometimes wake up in the middle of a dream and then fall asleep again and then fail to remember whether the memory is a memory of a dream or a memory of something that actually happened. We have all that sort of things going on. So why do these things happen? Now we need to think about how the brain came into existence. The question I actually got was, how can we trust our brains if they are not intelligently designed? Well, how can we trust our brains if they are intelligently designed? Whether or not the brain is intelligently designed is completely irrelevant to whether or not it works or how well it works. However, if there are systematic errors in our brains, then the origin of the brain is relevant for tracking down these errors. Where do these errors come from? Well, let's say that we have three options. First of all, we have an evolved brain. It was never designed at all. It came to existence not through accidents, but through the combination of a lot of little accidents combined with natural selection, so that it was always the useful changes that survived. Over billions of years, this evolved life into what we have today. The other option is intelligent designed to be perfect, and the third is intelligently designed to not be perfect. So, in the first case, the case of evolution, the systematic errors must reasonably come from not having harmed our chances of survival, or even having increased our chances of survival. And there's actually one specific kind of evidence, one specific kind of error that is very consistent with survival, and that is the error called false positive. Let's say that you hear a sound, and this sound can be just something pointless, the wind going through some leaves or whatever, or the sound could be something important, perhaps a predator going after you. If you mistake the sound of the wind for the sound of a predator, then you will have lost a little bit of time and energy. You will have spent a few seconds or minutes or even longer than that on checking whether or not the predator is there. But if you mistake the sound of a predator for just leaves in the wind, then the predator will get you unaware and you will die. So false positive is very consistent with survival, and there is a lot of experimental evidence that people are very inclined to make all kinds of false positive. And one theoretical example of false positive making us jump into conclusion is, let's say that we have a story, it's an allegory, but the main character of this story is all powerful. It's a story about a god, and this story is not meant to be literal, not by the people who started with the story. It's a metaphor, but people start relating emotionally to this god, and then they get the idea, but what if he gets pissed that I don't believe that he exists? Maybe he will have me tortured forever if I don't believe that he exists. Therefore, he exists. This kind of reasoning says nothing about whether a personal god exists or not, but it does say a lot about humans' emotional need to play it safe. Better to take a false positive than a false negative. If our brains are inclined towards false positive throughout evolution, then it's no wonder that religion is everywhere. Religion is a part of evolution, the idea of intelligent design, because intelligent design is creationism. They just put a new label on it. But for all intents and purposes, intelligent design is Christian creationism, plain and simple. So intelligent design is part of something that has evolved. If the human brain has evolved, this is one of the three alternatives. The second alternative is that the brain was created by a higher power who intended the brain to be perfect. So why is the brain not perfect? Well, the Christian would point to a certain snake and a certain apple, corrupting the brain. This explanation, well, as narratives goes, it's a good explanation. It fills the narrative role of explanation, but it doesn't really tell us anything about how these errors work and why. It's a rather useless theory, and I can't see how there could be any evidence for or against it. It's a just so story. So from a scientific perspective, it's not very useful. It is not a theory that we can use to understand anything. It's only a theory that we can use to help ourselves stop asking questions. That's all it is. Then we have the third option, that the brain was intelligently designed but never intended to be perfect. If that is the case, then we can probably never find out how things were actually intended, because there could be fail-safes within the brain designed to stop us from finding the truth. If some Christians believe this, they might point to the story of the Tower of Babel. And they could also use the story about the snake and the apple for this purpose. They could argue that, well, the human brain was intended to be innocent, not rational. We were never meant to understand. In fact, this is more reasonable if one used a literal interpretation of the story. But in either case, if the brain is intelligently designed, we can't really trust our brain to find out anything, because either there isn't a pattern or there is a malicious pattern. If the brain has evolved, however, then there are no conspiracies, and I'm talking small scale conspiracies here. I mean, there is no brainwashing, there is no fail-safes designed to stop us from finding the truth. These false positives and so on, by working together and using knowledge and empirical evidence, we can step by step get past these errors. So, in conclusion, our brains are far more trustworthy on the whole if they are evolved rather than designed. That's my 2 cents on this issue. I'm going to put it up as a video response to the guy who asked the question, and he's probably going to get more video responses than allowed or something, so I'm going to link him in the below bar as well. I'm looking forward to an interesting debate. I hope that he will respond to this. That's all I have to say for now. Live long and prosper.